Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this video will be about weights and measures, and it will follow on, well, from many other series, but recently, especially the one in regards to the 0 point and the Giza complex, but just to explain in response to a comment. So this famous quote by Protagoras, man is a measure of all things. I've been focusing a lot, and in earlier series of the science of pyramids, ancient sciences, the importance of Vitruvian man as drawn by Leonardo da Vinci. But from this video where I was showing how the proportions of the Great Pyramid internally relate to, well, proportion and measurement come together from the internal, external, as above, so below. What's on the inside is on the outside, and that it's essentially based on the measure of an idealized Egyptian man. But in that, Mark Beeson left a comment, the cubit being the measure of one's arm, shouldn't it be mentioned whose arm it is? I think that the cubit and derivatives are expressions of daily domestic measurement system, some kind of rule of thumb, keep that in mind, guide to build a house, furniture, or quick land survey. Difficult to imagine someone's arm being referenced to build a pyramid though. So we have the Egyptian royal cubit, which was ideally based on the measure of an arm from the elbow to the tip of the finger. Now, of course, everyone varies slightly, or sometimes, because you have very short people, we have very tall people. Even to say the idealized, someone who's 6 foot, the length of their forearm can vary greatly as well. So this is an idealized system, but where's the origin of it? So let's go. So whose cubit is it anyway? When we talk about the cubit, that's from the elbow to the tip of the finger, and again that can vary very greatly. And so traditionally people think of the foot. Well, the foot is actually the forearm. It's not based because the foot and the forearm have a correspondence, and I'll do some more on that. But where does this come from? Now, there's some. It's usually just said it's based on a king's foot or a king's arm. Well, that's for a sophisticated economy society, that's a terrible way to go. So, for instance, you'd see these markings on the wall, often where the child's growth is marked. So children are growing, but once we reach at puberty, at the end of puberty, our bones will stop growing. However, and they'll basically stay the same for the rest of your life, but there is a slight amount of shrinkage, and also cartilage will change. So, for instance, people who go swimming, if you've never been swimming in a long time, you've done a lot of heavy lifting, you can actually gain, in a couple of weeks, you can gain maybe half an inch height, because you stretch yourself out. So the human body is always changing. A system of measure based on an actual person is not a very, very good idea, because it will change over time. So Vitruvian man, the image by Leonardo da Vinci, but it's actually based on the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, as in Vitruvian man, who wrote about the proportions of a body and the symmetry of a temple, and how a temple should be based on an idealized human form. So, but long before Da Vinci and centuries before Vitruvius, we have this metrological relief. Sorry, there's a typo there. That's at the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, England, and the Salamis stone in the Praeus Museum in Greece. And how does that translate? Well, we see long before Vitruvian man image, centuries before Vitruvius, because Vitruvius speaks about much older architectural practices, but this concept of the Vitruvian man, or the measure system, is there. Now, the studies of this have shown that it corresponds to a fathom. So basically, they had to, finish off the stone, but we have the center point, and so essentially that would be of this ancient yard, or 3 feet from the center to the tip of the finger. Therefore, 6 feet from fingertip to fingertip. 1 fathom is 6 feet. But there are varying measures in the ancient world. Now, the same things happen with this with this Salamis stone here. But before we go on, so you have a pediment on top of the traditional Greco-Roman temples, this triangular facade there at the top, and this metrological relief is in the shape. Now that angle is very nice because it will correspond to the golden angle, but in regards to the Salamis stone, for instance, on the Salamis stone, this foot or forearm is one English foot 2,000 years before it should be in existence. Also, the length of this ruler and the distance from the ruler to the bottom of the stone will also connect to the Doric and Ionic scales. You also have the Samian foot. What you have is multiple sets of measure actually built into the Salamis stone, and once applied to places such as the Parthenon, you'll find that multiple sets of measure converge, for instance, in the column height at very lovely numbers, but all the apparently separated units will come together so that each mason team was working in a whole number. They weren't sort of like the column in their native foot unit was not left down to a quarter. But the trick is that they actually weren't working in feet, they were working in fingers. 12 inches or thumbs per foot, or 16 fingers, digits per foot. So yeah, you need to look into fingers and as well as thumbs and inches. But there's quite a lot of information going on there. But what we have is, this is a tracing of the Salamis stone to make the stone a little bit clearer. And because the stone was broken, we can find the center of the stone because we have the navel or the umbilicus. That's the axis of symmetry to finish off and to work out what the whole Salamis stone is trying to tell us. And the umbilicus or the navel or the belly button being the center, marking this stone out, which is an important feature. So again, Vitruvius describes how a well-shaped man lays on his back. If you draw a circle, the radius of the circle turns out to be 5, and the height of the man would be equal to fingertip of outstretched arm, giving us a square. Now that's a nice connection because I'll link this series I posted a while back on. So another name for the umbilicus or navel is also I've typoed there, Omphalos. There we see Omphalos. But this was an important feature in the ancient world. Omphalos, Benben, Umbilicus, navel stones would mark the center of the world. Now, for instance, in the center of Rome, the Roman world, there was a navel stone. At the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, which was considered the center of the Greek world, there was an Omphalos stone. And this is similar to Betel stones or to Benben stones as well. Now this would also relate because it's also marking the center of the world, the navel of the world, still an expression. Both the Easter Islanders, but also in South America, this concept of the navel or the center of a world is, I think even the original name for Easter Island translates to something like navel of the world or the center of the world. But that series will be linked in the description. Now it relates also to 0-point markers as well. But back to the Salamis stone, which is at a 3:2 ratio, which is a nice connection as well. But we see how it's very well. We're seeing the same information as in Vitruvian man. It's also interesting that the circle just seems to touch the edge of a foot. So even this image of Da Vinci, which was based on the Roman architect Vitruvius, relates to these ancient metrological reliefs where we have these stones would be placed in a prominent position. Then any merchant, mason, carpenter, person going to market could go and with a piece of string or a twig mark the weight the measure, and then when they go to the market and they're buying cloth by the yard, etc., they're not going to get cheated, and that's an important feature. Also link this paper by Mark Wilson Jones. He'll go more in depth on these features in regards to these various metrological reliefs. So the man was not the king. The man would be something like this, like where it's carved. It doesn't shrink, it doesn't change. It's there available to everyone. The king doesn't want dirty peasants coming along with a cord and checking their measures against him. It's not, that's a nice description of it, but just like now, that's how we work. We would have a prototype bar. So for instance, the meter prototype bar, but in England or America, especially at the Treasury building or the NIST or CSIRO, these major scientific institutes or money, where they're making coins, they would hold a prototype like the official yardstick or the official foot or etc. would be stored in a place like this, and this was again an ancient practice. But another way would be on a major statue. So rather than the man would be a statue, and so the man himself would be at a certain height, at a certain width, and from there you could get your official measures, or such as here is Leptis Magna in Libya, this Roman commercial trading port. They also had these simple lines marked out, which again has multiple units: the Punic cubit, the Roman foot, and also the Egyptian royal cubit shown in, and it's just a matter of knowing how to read them, and you can transmit that information. So that's how it goes. So kings and queens are all of different sizes. They come and go, but weights and measures remain stable over centuries or longer. For instance, many kings in Egypt, or the kings of England, queens of England, they're all different sizes. They're all different ages they come in. It's just not done to have a single, to base it on an actual person. Maybe you would take the idealized measures and then you would store it in stone or an iron bar or a copper bar, something like that, to preserve, and then you can make copies and distribute it to every marketplace, because tax would be based on these measures. And so people, you don't want to be overtaxed, and the government doesn't want to undertax, of course. And so it's important to have this information all around and available to all people. You're not going to, the king's not going to go around measuring the land of some guy in a trade deal. That's just, that's one of these old, like the king's foot. It doesn't, it's just obvious it doesn't work like that. So, but why weights and measures? So, for instance, we have an old ancient Roman ruler with the markings on there. We have old cubit rods and weights. So whether it's ancient or modern, weights and measures are the backbone of any civilization. The economy, science, it just, you cannot transmit, you cannot work a large-scale economy if you don't have standardized weights and measures. So whether it's land deal, tax deals, at the marketplace buying a grain or spices or whatever it is, you need weights and measures. So whether, even if you think, oh, this is not interesting to me, well, if you, whatever you're into, whatever your fancy is, weights and measures apply to you. And it's very important. Even if you're just having fun on a Friday night, weights and measures are involved in this system. So there's a lot of, when you look at your typical imperial versus metric system, it's like the hatred of the imperial system, and basically that metric is a superior system. Well, metric is convenient, it is easy, but imperial measures contain information, and so it can be confusing. But whether it was different scales, so measuring ale, wine, butter and cheese, wool, cloth, yarn, they all had different measures, but that was an important feature, because if you use the same measure for everything, well, it doesn't describe the reality of life. So for instance, a pound, okay, we'll explain that a little bit more, but different products had different measures. Different industries, such as apothecary, which was basically the chemist or the medicine maker, was working on a different weight than what the avoirdupois or foodstuffs were bought. Now, troy weight was the ounce and the pound that they used to sell precious metals, and that would have an important relationship to the end product, and we'll go into that next. I'll split this video up into into a few pieces and keep it each under 15 minutes, but I'll carry on with the next part as well. So next part will be posted very soon. SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. If you'd like to help the channel out, I'll leave a link in the description to this PayPal account, SGD, Sacred Geometry. And next part will be up very soon. Cheers, have a good one.